So we got little old Timmy, and little old Timmy works in IT. And Timmy's always been a nerd, but he hasn't really been a gamer. But he's like, I work in IT. I need a new hobby. I need to get along with my coworkers. I might as well try to pick up gaming for a hobby. And so little old Timmy in IT goes up to one of his gaming buddies named Brad. And Timmy says, "Hey, Brad, I'm trying to get into some video games. What difficult video games could you recommend for me?" What is Brad most likely to say? Brad is obviously most likely to say Dark Souls. When people think difficult video game, what typically comes to mind for people? It's Dark Souls. It is the quintessential, it is the difficult video game, right? That's usually what people think of normally. And so, what's interesting about that response, what's interesting about Dark Souls in general, is that Dark Souls isn't the most mechanically challenging game. It's not the game that requires the quickest reactions. So why is it then that when people, think of difficult video game, the first video game to come to mind for a lot of people is Dark Souls? And the reason why that is isn't necessarily because of the mechanical challenge or anything like that at all. The reason, or one of the biggest reasons why that is because the game adds insult to injury every time you die. Because every time you die, you don't spawn right where you died, you spawn at the bonfire. And it takes about 2 to sometimes even 5 to 6 minutes for you to walk from the bonfire to the boss fight. And you might die along the way. So let's say, you slog through some difficult monsters for 5 minutes, you get to the boss, you die at the boss, you gotta do those 5 minutes all over again. And then you get back to the boss, you die at the boss, you gotta do, those 5 minutes of challenging difficult monsters all over again. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that Dark Souls feels so punishing. It's the walk back. And what makes video games so fun is going in there, especially these kind of games, right? It's going in there, let's say you get to the boss fight and you die at the boss. You get that moment of introspection where you're like, what could I have done better? Maybe I shouldn't have rolled right. Maybe I should have rolled left. Maybe I shouldn't have parried. Maybe I should have dodged, right? And then you go in there again and you try it again. And this time you do the right thing and you progress. Maybe instead of getting the boss to 90% health, you get him to 80. You feel good. You're feeling good. You go in again. You get him to 60. Maybe the time after that, you fuck up. You get to 80. You're upset. You go in. You get him to 50. Right? And it's that iteration. It's that process of trying and learning and trying and learning that makes a lot of these video games as fun as they are. And so, since a lot of the enjoyment comes from feeling that sense of progression, when you pad out the time between games, it adds that feeling of punishment. And it's not always bad because it makes those moments when you're at the boss fight so much more tense. I fought Dark Souls bosses where my heart was kind of pumping because I knew if I died, I would have to deal with some bullshit. I'm talking to you, Capra Demon in Dark Souls 1. And so if you contrast that to good old classic World of Warcraft, right? World of Worldly, right? It takes the average player about 240 hours to get from level 1 to level 60. So let's say a little old Timmy is like, okay, you know what? I'm going to actually play this new game mode that seems to have come out. Everyone at the IT department is raging about it. It's called Hardcore Classic World of Warcraft. And so he goes in there, let's say Timmy he got really lucky or he had some guidance. He made it all the way to level 20. And let's say that took him about 30 hours. He's slow. He's exploring. He's having a good time. He's not trying to rush. Took him about 30 hours, right? And he dies. Compared to that experience to what most normal people consider to be the quintessential difficult video game, Dark Souls, you're not walking back for a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. You're walking back in 20 hours. You're retreading the same ground all over again. Those 20 hours, 30 hours down the drain, and that's just level 20. Let's not even start talking about level 30, level 40, level 50, right? Like, that's something else altogether. And so it creates a situation now where Timmy goes, and let's say he dies to, oh, I don't know, a boar. He dies to some boar at level 20. And the board charged him, and he didn't expect the board to charge him, but it charged him because he doesn't know that much about the game, and so he dies. And he learns, it's like, oh, well, maybe I should have used a potion there. It's going to take him 20 to 30 hours for him to even try that again. Does that sound like good game design? And that's not even to mention the fact that he can just have really unfair things happen to him. Right before I hit record for this video, I watched a clip of Pashiro, who is one of the best rogues for Classic World of Warcraft, who was doing fine, he was doing great, and then he disconnected from the game and he came back in and he was dead. Now, the typical response to this would be, well, Glavian, hold up, wait a minute. Most people who are playing hardcore Classic World of Warcraft have been playing WoW for decades. You know, they played Classic WoW. And they got to max level not once, not twice, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. This is a solved game, a solved game. So, you know, that's your fault if you get to the board and you didn't know that the board charged. You're supposed to know that because we've all been playing the game for the past 20 years. What's wrong with you? And this is the problem with how Blizzard has been designing World of Warcraft for a while now, isn't it? They continue to design the game for the top sliver of players, and it continues to increase the barrier to entry for everyone else. And let's talk a minute about the veterans. Let's talk a minute about those people who have been playing WoW for so long. And, you know, they know the game inside and out. They know like the back of their hand. And the reason why hardcore became popular to begin with this group is because they've played it so many times. They know everything there is to know about it. There's no more exploration, there's no more discovery, there's no more sense of challenge, there's no more sense of accomplishment because there's no more sense of challenge. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to squeeze out the last teeny little drops left of the World of Warcraft classic lime, the lemon. It's wrung out, and they're trying to squeeze out a few little drops when they could have just gone and played Dark Souls. When there's a bunch of great games that have come out over the past 20 to 30 years, or I'm sorry, 10 to 20 years. It hasn't been that long yet. That you can go try. You know, World of Warcraft Classic is an excellent game, but it's not the only excellent game that has ever come out. It's not. Go play something else. Why are we trying to squeeze out the last drops of this lemon? Why? And so you like now you're having to deal with all this bullshit, right? You're having to deal with like unfair disconnects. You're having to deal with that padding in between mistakes that is as long as it is. And you know, this is an easily solvable problem. You know, Blizzard is lazy. Blizzard is obviously lazy. And they're also really risk averse. And so the reason why hardcore became a sanctioned official game mode anyway is because Blizzard saw that it was already popular amongst a group of players. People were doing this unofficially. They have been for years. You know, they made their own rule set, they made their own add-ons, and they've been playing hardcore WoW Classic for a couple years now, if not longer. You know, it's not a new idea, and it's just been getting more and more popular. And so Blizzard saw that popularity amongst, you know, a niche audience, you know, the top 10%, 1% of players in their player base. And they're like, you know, well, since this is already popular, why don't we just capitalize on this trend? There's no risk involved. We already know they're going to like it. How do you know that? Because they're already doing it. But in typical Blizzard fashion, they missed the forest for the trees. What people want from WoW is a fresh experience. They love the game. They want a fresh experience where there's more exploration, where there's more challenge, where there's another sense of discovery or more sense of discovery. And that can be implemented through Classic Plus, through adding more content, through changing the content, etc., etc. But Blizzard is lazy. Blizzard is risk averse. And so instead of doing that, they're like, why don't we just make hardcore? The only reason people were playing hardcore to begin with is because there were no other options to freshen up the experience. And not only that, you know what they could have done that is about as lazy as removing the release spared button? They could have made it so that when you die, you lose 5% experience, 10% experience. It's about as easy to program. It's about as easy as removing the release spared button. And it creates a situation where the time between those iterations, the padding, is not 20, 30, 50, 100 hours. It might be 10 minutes, it might be 15 minutes, and that padding time is going to increase the higher you level up, which is natural. When you progress through a game, it gets harder and harder, and it still adds enough of that sense of incentive to not want to die, because no one wants to lose 10% experience. That's not fun. So it still creates that adrenaline rush, but Blizzard couldn't even think that far because because they just copy and pasted what was already being done. But the reason why people were playing hardcore and not a game that has XP loss to begin with is because they're not the devs, so they can't add a minus XP experience to the game. All they could have added is hardcore, so Blizzard just copy and pasted it instead of thinking outside the box. Typical Blizzard, right? Typical Blizzard. And so to kind of wrap this up here, I kind of want to talk a little bit of a tinfoil hat theory. Get your tinfoil hats out, a little bit of a conspiracy theory here, right? Because this is interesting to me. In classic World of Warcraft, in hardcore classic World of Warcraft, there is an item. It is called the Petrification Flask. And what this item does is it makes it so that if you die in classic World of Warcraft, what happens is if you feel like you're dying in classic World of Warcraft, you can pop this item and it makes it so you can't attack, but you also can't get attacked for a whole minute. And so it's your oh shit button. You can get away free card button, where you can pop your petrification flask and you can kind of escape. And Blizzard decided to leave this in classic hardcore servers. And what's interesting is Blizzard also decided to leave the auction house in hardcore and trading in hardcore, where in the community-driven hardcore events that existed before the official hardcore servers came out, you couldn't trade, you couldn't use the auction house. That was against the hardcore rule set. And petrification flasks are very expensive. They require black lotuses to make. They're rather expensive, take a lot of gold. So now Blizzard has created this situation where if you want to be competitive, they've created this competitive game mode, this race to see like who's really good at this 20-year-old game and can't die. And we're going to have a leaderboard to see who can not die in this 20-year-old game that requires grandpa reflexes. Let's see, right? Who can hit the leaderboards. And they've created a situation where you get a massive advantage for having a lot of gold, because if you have a lot of gold, you could buy a lot of Petri flasks. And if you could buy a lot of Petri flasks, your chances of dying dramatically decrease. And so, in the other versions of World of Warcraft, having a lot of gold is similarly advantageous. Why is it similarly advantageous in retail World of Warcraft? Why is it similarly advantageous in World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King? The reason it's advantageous, or Blizzard designed it to be advantageous, is so you could buy, wait for it, the WoW token. Because if you buy the WoW token, you get gold. And when you get gold, you can play the game at a higher level. You can be more competitive, and people won't kick you out of groups. And so while there is no WoW token yet in classic World of Warcraft, they did recently add a shop button to the game client. They've decided deliberately to leave in the Petri Flask. And they've enabled trade and the auction house. Just some food for thought. And that's all I had to say for this one. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.